talking about the specifically the IPM Sage integration, but this is a lot of the stuff that we'll be going through is applicable to any accounting system that we integrate with. So I'll be focusing mostly on AP invoices and things related to those, so accounts, jobs, etc. But it's similar similar method steps for most of the issues that you might be trying to troubleshoot. So I've prepared a couple of invoices in IPM that have been rejected from Sage for various reasons. So I'm not actually going to start in IPM. I'll start in Sage. So which is where I always start to troubleshoot issues, because that's where most of the information is going to be to tell me whether the problem's in Sage or whether it's in IPM. So I'll just jump onto the server here. So the first thing to note is that the IPM link service, which is the tool that controls the integration, will sit on a server. So if you're running Sage CRE, then it'll sit on your Sage server. If you're running a cloud accounting product, then it will just be sitting on a server. So so you might have a single server that your company uses because all your products are cloud-based, and we just put it there. But that's where all of the log files and stuff live. So the first bit of it is I'll start in the services here. So to access this, you'd need to have administrator access to the server, otherwise you won't be able to access the services and the IPM link component. But the other bits that I'll show you, like the log files, you don't need to be an administrator. You just have to have the appropriate access to the folders, which can be given to end users. So before we start playing with the desktop tool, we need to go in and make sure that the IPM link service is stopped if we're going to play with it, or that it is running if we're not seeing information come across. So at the moment here, I've got services open and I've got the IPM link service, and this is currently not running. So see, the status is blank. So this can happen if it's not running and it should be, then it could be that the server restarted and that it hasn't started up the service. So this one's set to manual, so this one's not going to start automatically. But if you have admin access and you see that service isn't running, you can just come in and start the service with the little play button up here. So, but if we want to actually play with the manual side of it, so that we can manually push data across, then we need to make sure the service is stopped so that we're not running competing processes. The tool, when I start it up, will actually tell me that it's that the service is running if I haven't stopped it. So it does give you a little prompt. So I just need to go and find in my programs. It might be in the recently added here. If not, then let me just open a new file explorer. Then it's going to be on C drive, program files x86, IPM global, IPM link, and here's our tool. So when you're running this manually, you need to make sure that you run it as an administrator. Otherwise, it can't write the log files that are really important for us to understand what's happening. So to do that, I just right click it and go run as administrator. Again, if you don't have admin access to your server, then you won't be able to do that. So let me just minimize these, get them out of the way. So this is the desktop tool. You don't really need to play with any settings here, because when we set it up, all of the settings should be configured. So it's not those settings that ever need to change. This will just allow you to do a manual push if something's not working. So one of the a relatively common issue that we have is that Sage will throw an error message to say that there are inconsistencies in the data, and that will stop the macros from firing that do the imports. until we manually dismiss them. So I'll often stop the service, come in here and just tell it to sync the orders and claims, wait for the screen to open up in Sage with that message, and then dismiss them all, and then go and turn back on the service. So this will do exactly what the automatic service is doing, just at a manual level. So the service will go through and sync all of these things, and we can tell it to sync only some of them. So obviously accounts is your customers and vendors, jobs, self-explanatory, resources is people and equipment, orders and claims is your purchase invoices, subcontract invoices, and AR invoices. Items, if you're using item maintenance, then we can maintain items in an item database. Timesheets is your timesheets for payroll. So if you're processing your timesheets through the site diaries and then bringing them into a timesheet batch, you can click the timesheet one and it'll produce the import file for payroll. And then cost transactions is bringing a cost back from the JC costs into IPM. So cost transactions are only ever from the accounting system into IPM. This ignore last sync date will tell it to go and check every single record again. So if there's been something missed that was supposed to sync 2 months ago, and it won't sync just by hitting that accounts button. If you tell it to ignore the last sync date and then do the sync, then it will cycle through every single record. For obvious reasons, that sync takes a lot longer because it has to check thousands, potentially tens of thousands of records instead of just the ones that have changed. Okay, so this is not going to help you troubleshoot, but it will help you to force things through. So for troubleshooting, where you want to start is in the logs file. So in that same folder that I got the link tool up before, there's this logs folder. So if I open that up, I can see I've got a number of just text files in here. So it will create a new text file every day. So we can see here I've got data service 10th of the 11th, 21. So that's this morning. I've got two different IPM sites that are set up with my IPM link. So I've got two data service files for this one. Most customers will only have one. So it's the one that's prefixed with the company that you're interested in. For example, if you have 4 data files in Sage, but you only have one IPM site, you will still only have one, and you'll have all of the details for that data file in that one for all 4 data files in that one file. So I've got this data service, and then I've got the exceptions file. I don't really look in the exceptions file very often because most of the information that I need gets put in the data service. So if I open that up, this is just a log that it starts at the top, and throughout the day, it just appends the issues down to the bottom. So we can see starting at the top, it's saying, okay, it's connecting to CRM, to IPM. It's going through and checking the jobs, sub-jobs, job tasks. So this is obviously, I've done some manual syncs here because it's not checking accounts and things. But you can see pretty well where it starts and stops because it's going back to the connecting to the server. So if I scroll down the bottom to my most recent log, so this is the last run that happened. It's going and it's saying, okay, checking the invoices. And you can see here it's checking invoices from the previous sync. So ones that were not able to be sent across, it's going and checking them again. So it's saying here it can't find this invoice in Timberline, it's trying to send it again. And then it's actually telling me why it's having a problem. It's saying the job and task combination doesn't exist in Timberline. Then it's going through all of my purchase invoices. So all of the records that we're interested in should be listed in this in this log file. It doesn't give me the full detail about which line is the problem, but it does give me a pretty good idea. And if I'm not seeing something in here, then I know that that there's somewhere else to check. So this is always my first place to check is the log here, because most of the common issues will be spelled out pretty nicely for us. So once you've checked the data service, the next place to check is in your Sage data in your Sage company data folder. So I've got this is my company. So I've got all of my normal Sage information over here. Let's just get rid of that one. And so when IPM Link runs, it will create now this is specific to CRE, it will create a text file and call some macros to import those text files. So if I just filter this by type, equals text document, then I've got some AP import files. I've got my reject file here, so this is important. So this AP import file is what's actually going to try and import, and then this is the output from the import macro. So IPM Link will call the import macro. It will import this file and put any rejected records in here. As you can see, the other files are here too. So we've got for AR invoices, for equipment cost, payroll. So this reject file is just going to give me the information that was rejected. It's not going to tell me what's wrong with it. It's just the rows that have a problem being imported. So if I go back a level in my folders here, when that macro runs, it should create a printout of everything that's happening. So for AP invoices, it will first go through and import an estimates file. So if we have new cost codes added, then it will import that file to add the cost codes to the job, and then it will go through and import the invoices. So there is a printout for the JC imports, which can show you some issues. So if it doesn't exist if there's something that doesn't exist as a standard cost category, for example, it will reject the estimate file. But probably 99% of the issues you're going to find in the AP printout. So if I jump into my AP folder, and if I go to import invoices, then I've got this IPM Link import. It might be titled slightly different. It might be IPM AP import print, whatever. But this file should get updated every time the sync runs. So I'll touch on that a bit later. But this is going to show me exactly why things were rejected. So when we do our import, if I go to the last page, this information here is telling me exactly what that reject file is all about. So these line numbers here refer to the line that each of these items are. So here I've got, let me just put these side by side. Okay, so we've got line 1. It's saying there is no vendor field. Okay, so in this position should be our vendor code, and that vendor code is missing. And then I've got lines 5 and 9, so I can go down here and I can say, okay, there's line 5, there's line 9, and I can see both of those are missing a job task no, sorry, we're both missing a category, cost category. So this file, my example here, I haven't got all of the potential issues that you might have, but this file should be able to point you in the right direction of what information is missing. Okay. So this line 20 here is probably one of the most common issues that we get, which says the record ID APIF cannot be the last ID in the file. So what that's referring to is this this bit right at the start of each line. So our APIF line is the invoice header. So what this is telling me is because there's no APDF line, then I don't have any invoice details that I'm actually sending across. So I'm sending across the vendor, the vendor invoice number, what the invoice is about, dates, etc. But I don't have any distribution lines. So there's no actual transactions on that invoice. Okay. So most of the time what that means in IPM is that someone's forgotten to enter the approved amount and they've just approved it without that amount present. Okay, so I'm going to run through a couple of these examples and what they look like in IPM. So we'll deal with the first one that the vendor field is missing, and I'm going to deal with it on what line is that? 16. I'll deal with it on this invoice. Let me just jump off the server. Okay, so the easiest way to find invoices that is going to be the same for every IPM customer is via this invoice processing dashboard. So some customers will have invoices down the side here, others won't. So you need to go via the purchase order or the subcontract. But this invoice processing dashboard is on every customer site. And so what we've got here is we've got our scan invoices, which we don't care about, but we've got our purchase invoices and our subcontract invoices. Now, this is not immediately giving us the information that we need, but I can quickly jump through to all of the invoices. So if I go through and I'll just do that again. If I click my three dots here and go see all records, then I can come in here and change this header to show me just the active invoices. Okay. So I'm just going to click through this one because I know that that's the one that it was. So I've got this invoice that was rejecting because of the vendor. You can search in those these invoices by the vendor invoice number. So if you come up in the quick find here and you have the vendor invoice number, you can search it there. But if I click through to that, then this is my invoice that was rejecting. So Sage is saying that there's no vendor invoice number. So we've got our vendor here, which is Tesla Australia. If I click through to that, the first thing that I'm going to get to is the Ipm Contact, which I won't go into great detail, but is essentially a linking record. So we need to then click through to the CRM account record, which is the vendor or customer record in IPM. So when we send accounts either from Sage into IPM or from IPM into Sage, the important linking record is called the IPM account ERP system record. So from my account here, so I've got my account information, my addresses, etc. But if I go to my related records here, I can go to my IPM ERP systems. And this is where I would expect to see a vendor invoice number or a customer, a vendor number or a customer number. So the fact that there are none here means that there is no link between this and an account in Sage. So this particular account I created earlier and didn't link it to Sage. If I wanted to link it to Sage, then I could come in and say, okay, I want to create a new record for this company. They're a supplier. give them a code and nominate my Sage data file, which is called Thrive Construction. So if I then went and ran the account sync now, this would be pushed into Sage as a vendor. Okay. So this is where you can go and verify which account an invoice is supposed to go to in Sage. So another common scenario that I get is that an invoice has been sent to Sage and someone can't see it against that vendor. And it's because the vendors have similar names and someone's picked the wrong one on the PO. And then if you go and look at if you go and drill back through the PO back to the account, find that account number and look it up in Sage, most of the time that invoice will be there in Sage just against the wrong vendor. So this is how you can make absolutely sure that you're looking under the right vendor for an invoice. Okay, so back to our invoice. So this invoice has two problems. So one was that it didn't have a vendor code. So if I went and ran the sync again, it would push that invoice across with the vendor code that I've just entered. We would need to run the account sync first. So you could do that manually. You could go and tell it to sync the accounts and then tell it to sync the orders and the invoices, or you could just turn the sync back, the automatic sync back on, and it will cycle through. It might reject on the first run because the account hasn't quite made it in there yet. But after probably the second run, it should just go through. So it's all about timing. I'll usually just run the account sync manually, just so that I can be sure that it's fixed and close that out. So the other issue that this invoice has is that it has no approved amount. So up here in the top right hand corner, I've got an approved amount and there is no value. So that means that this invoice has been approved for $0. So what I need to do is add an amount to it. Now, if I try and go to my detail lines, I won't be able to change it. So because what happens is when documents get approved, they get flagged as finalized, which means they're read only, and they need to then be changed so that they're no longer read only. So most of our IPM clients have a button up here. They have slightly different processes that they can click the button to change the invoice, and it will reset it so that it's no longer approved and it's not finalized. I don't have that button because it's just my demo site. Let me just see. No, I don't have it. Okay. So I would just need to run a process on this to then make this grid so that I can edit it. Once that's done, I would just reapprove the invoice and it should go across. So in here, if we're looking at the detail lines, I can see, yep, there's definitely no amount on distribution line is completely missing because there is no amount to send to Sage. The other thing to be aware of on invoices, and I'm just going to bring up a slightly different view, is that when an invoice is marked as when an invoice gets sent across to whatever accounting system, it will get marked as exported. So one of the things that the process that will reset this invoice does is reset that flag so that it no longer says that it's exported. So if I go, so I've just brought up an advanced find here, which is like our query builder, and I'm just going to show some additional columns. So I'll go edit columns, add columns, and go, I want to see the exported flag, and let's show the purchase order and the invoice number, and I can show the vendor invoice number if I want. I can apply different criteria to this stuff. I was looking for this specific invoice and I just wanted to see some more details about it that aren't on the form here. I could say where the number equals PO-21 etc. I'm not going to do that. I don't have that many invoices in my system, so I'm not going to put in filter criteria. But if I go to results, it's going to show me all of the invoices, and you can see here this exported column. They're all flagged as exported. So setting that back to no, just make sure that IPM Link will look at it again. So it should go through and find any invoices, even if they're marked as exported, that haven't been sent across. But setting this flag to no, just make sure that it looks at it again. So the parameters for an invoice to initially get sent across are that the exported flag is. Actually, I'll just add 2 more columns on here. Finalized and IPM status. So the things that IPM Link is looking for to send an invoice across are that it's exported says no, finalized says yes, and the IPM status is approved. Okay, so these invoices have all been exported. These ones have obviously been reset since they got sent across, and then these ones should have been exported as well. But those are really the 3 flags on the invoice itself to check. Okay, so let me just jump back to my my file. So one of the other common ones that we get is exactly this message. So the extra cost code and category don't have values. Okay, so it's saying, which line is that referring to? Line 18, which is this one, I believe. So this invoice, we've got a vendor invoice number. We've got all of our dates, we've got distribution lines, but on this distribution line, I can see we've got a job number. We've got a job task. We don't have a subjob, which is fine, or an extra in CRE, but we don't have a cost category, which should be after the job task or cost code. So not every CRE customer needs categories. You either use them or you don't. But if they're set up that they need to use categories, every line needs to have a cost category. So if we go have a look at this invoice in IPM, it's my gas supply invoice. Go to my details, so I can see I've got an approved amount. It's been approved and finalized, so it's all looking good. I've got amounts on each of the lines, but I don't have a cost type. Okay, so the easiest way particularly for end users to resolve this is to unfinalize the invoice, and then because this information is coming from the PO lines, we need to change the PO itself. Okay, so if we go into the purchase order, so I'll just do that a bit quick. So from the first page of our invoice, I can click through to the purchase order, and on my items here, I've got no cost types. Again, this record is finalized, so I would need to go up here, and I do have this button here. I've got my change PO button. This is just going to reset it so that it's entered and not finalized. And so at that stage, I can come back into my items grid here and enter my cost type. Okay, so actually this is probably subcontract. Let's just call this materials. Okay, I'm also missing a unit of measure here. Some accounting systems will reject records if they don't have a unit of measure. I don't believe that CRE does. We'll just put one in there just in case. So it's good practice to make sure that all of these lines are filled out. But now I've got these cost types. When I go back to the invoice, I go to my invoice here. I'm not going to see any information here because my PO is not approved. So this is one of the common steps that people run into is they've gone and changed purchase order and then expecting it to update here. And it won't because they haven't then gone through the approval process for that purchase order. So we need to go through and tell it we need to approve that purchase order. And it's going to go make sure that we can approve that. And then if I go to my invoices, I go to the related invoices, then I should now have detailed lines here. Okay. So you can see that I've got my cost types updated here now. And so we would need to flag this invoice, or most of the time I would need to flag this invoice as not exported, just for it to look at it again, particularly if it's been sitting there for a little while. As I said, it is supposed to check every invoice until it goes in. My personal experience, I've found that it misses some, so it's just easier to unfinalize it and reapprove it, or just on certain sites we've got a process that just marks it as not exported, so that Link looks at it again. But then the next sync that it goes through, it should go in and say, it should go and find the new information and send that invoice across. Okay. Taxes. So on here we haven't got any tax groups, but if I go through and so if I've just got I've got a little button down here that will launch the grid column selector. So I can go across, and on most sites we've been good and renamed this to tax group, but if we haven't done that, it's custom detail 1 that is the tax group. So here I can see, okay, I've got GST on each of these. For things like CRE, this is pretty straightforward. It's either GST or it's ex-GST. For things like Xero, it's not as straightforward. They've got like input and output GST as different tax codes, and Xero will reject it if it's using the wrong one. GST should be the default. And if they've sent across an invoice that has GST that shouldn't, then you would need to, if you want to change it in IPM and in Sage, if it's already made it across to Sage, you'd need to void the invoice in Sage, come in and unfinalize the invoice, change this tax group to ex-GST, and then send it across again. Okay, so I think that's most of the common scenarios. And for end users, a lot of the troubleshooting should be they should be able to do. So everyone should that has access to like Sage AP should have access to the log file, to the import files, and to the printouts. Obviously, these printouts are I've got them directing to a PDF document, but if they're directing just to a .prn file, then you need to launch it in Sage and go to view the printouts that way. But it's all the same information. So yeah, most of the people that need to troubleshoot this information should have access to basically everything except for the services and the link tool itself. So as I said, most of our sites, we've created functions that will allow you to reset invoices, POs, etc. by yourselves. But just particularly for consultants, if you can't see a button up here, then there's usually a workflow in here. So if you come up to say flow, there's usually a workflow that we put in here that's called unfinalized PO or unfinalized invoice. They're relatively straightforward. You just come in here and run that workflow. So this one's going to flag it as not exported, so that the link will look at it again. It'll go and run that workflow. I can't see anything update on here because I don't have the exported flag visible. But if I went into the advanced find I had up earlier, I'd be able to see that it'd go through and change that flag for Link to look at it again. I think that's about it from me. So we'll go to questions, I think.
Thank you, Alex. Just while everybody's catching their breath, I've got a question for you. So on your log file, when there's a issue, will that keep on appearing every time the IP link service runs, or is it just a once-off?
Yes, so it should, and I say should because I have seen cases where it gets missed, but we should see in both the data service file and the reject file the same invoice appearing until it goes through. So unless we mark it, unless we tell mark it as exported and change the posting sequence so that it doesn't get looked at again in IPM, it should just continue appearing in this log file. So here I've got, we'll use this example. So I've got PO 00114. It couldn't send it across in that sync. It couldn't send it across in this sync or this one. So it should just continuously get added to that log file. Even if it was from 3 weeks ago, it should just keep appearing in that file until it gets resolved.
Okay, so there's nothing in chat. Are there any of the consultants who want to ask a question?
Hi, Shane here. I'll ask a question, and it might need someone at the accounts to pipe in. If we have an invoice rejected from Sage because the period is closed in Sage, what would be the appropriate way to resolve that?
So that's a question that that's an issue that Liberty have quite often, and the way that that Karcher prefers to deal with it is by unfinalizing the invoice in IPM and dating it at the first of the next open period.
Great, thanks. And then presumably resetting the exported date.
Yeah, so as part of the unfinalized processes that I write for every customer, I'll have it do all three. So I'll have it set this to entered, set this to no, and set the exported flag to no all at the same time. Because if we're changing an invoice, 99% of the time we want it to be sent again. And if that's not the case, then Link will just see that the invoice already exists, so it won't send it again. It'll just get rejected from Sage because it's already in there. So yeah, that should happen as part of that unfinalized process.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
So I will just note that obviously I covered where we were missing a cost type, but if it was the case that it was the wrong combination of cost code and cost type, then we would go through the same process of unfinalizing the purchase order, changing the whichever one needs to change, the cost code and the cost type, and then refinalizing it, reapproving the invoice to send it across. So you'll only be able to do that if Sage has actually rejected it. So an example of that might be if it's not a valid GL account, the combination isn't a valid GL account, then Sage will reject it. If it's just someone's entered it wrong and it should be a different cost code, but it's made it into Sage, then you've got to make a decision about whether you just change it in Sage or whether you void it in Sage and change it in IPM and send it across again. But the process is the same for changing those as it is for adding them when they're missing.
Okay, guys, if we don't have any other questions, then I think we're coming to the end of this Lunch and Learn. So once again, thank you, Alex, for your time, and thank you for everyone attending.
Thanks, guys.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.